Hello everybody and welcome back to the Wakelet podcast. We have a really exciting episode for you today. We are revisiting the theme of personal and professional development, a mini-series as part of the Wakelet podcast that we've done in the past. I'm really excited about this episode. I think listeners will get a lot of value from the stories that we share today and the ideas that we discuss. For the first time ever, we have a special guest on the Wakelet podcast, Leon Lloyd. Thank you very much for joining.
Hey, thank you for having me. I feel no pressure being the first guest, so that's great.
Well, sorry, I hope I don't throw you into the deep end there, but Leon has played at the highest level of rugby for Gloucester.
Gloucester, that's correct.
Gloucester Rugby, Leicester Tigers, and of course England as well. You have 5 caps at England, won 2 Heineken Cup trophies, and now the co-founder and director of Centrum Solutions. So we have obviously a lot of value I'm sure that you can share with us today, so I'm really excited. To give a quick overview to the listeners of what the podcast is going to be about, we're going to share stories about mindset, the importance of teamwork, adapting to change, taking on different challenges, the kind of mindset you need to take on different challenges, and you know, operating within a team as well. So of course everybody encounters challenges, especially in the last year. It's been a difficult year for everybody, but just to get the ball rolling about challenges and what kind of approach you can take to a challenge, whether it's in your professional life, in your family life, whatever it is, what kind of approach or what kind of mindset is necessary to taking on these challenges, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question to get us going. I think I'm a massive believer of you're a product of your environment, and I've been very fortunate to have played in some elite teams and had some elite, amazing leaders, coaches, captains, and just people from around me who have just led the way, led by example. And I think one of the key things that I've learned from being around in those environments is like controlling the controllables.
Yeah.
Things that don't get flustered or don't get stressed about stuff which you can't control because they're there anyway. Just focus on the things that you can.
Yeah.
And I suppose that if you go into things, talking specifically about sport, and a really simple example would be, you plan for a match, a cup final against a team, and you plan for dry conditions, and all of a sudden you run out, and it happened to us on numerous occasions. You run out, and all of a sudden the weather's changed, and it's absolutely hammering down with rain, and that game plan goes out the window. Yeah. You can spend 10-15 minutes complaining about the rain and everything else, but it's not going to change anything. The rain's still there, and you just got to quickly adapt. And I think that's playing sport. Sport forces you to be a quick thinker. You've got to think on your feet and to be adaptable to the circumstances. So I think that mindset is developed more so in elite sport. But again, when you look at elite anything, people have that adaptability in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So it's essentially keeping your cool regardless of what the environment is. And being able to adapt and kind of maintaining composure, and also being able to withdraw certain elements of those that are around you and tapping into that support system. Because obviously we all operate on teams, it's not in sport or if you work in an office, or obviously a lot of the Wakelet community are educators as well. So it's being able to adapt and to keep your cool in those moments. So that's very interesting. So, I mean, on mindset, just a little bit more broadly, what is the importance of mindset and like an elite mentality? Does that resonate with you? Is that something that you can tap into? And do you think there's a positive? Are there any negatives attached to the concept of like an elite mentality?
I think I'm sure there might be negatives attached to it, but I've not certainly witnessed any. I think, as I said before, I've been very fortunate to have been exposed to that elite environment, so the elite mindset. I think I have that, and I think I class myself as a high achiever. I set myself high standards, high goals. The same for my children and my team as well, my work colleagues. And the good thing about setting yourself high standards, even if you just fall short, if they're high anyway, you're still going to be where you want to be. I think they have to be realistic as well. But I think having that mindset of trying to be the best you can, but also working. You touched upon team. That's my favourite. My favourite topics, and culture and those things. They're the things that I'm really passionate about. How do I get the best out of myself and my team? Mm-hmm. I know for a fact that if I get the best out of my team, it gets the best out of me anyway. Yeah. So everyone has to be thinking and swimming and pulling in the same direction. And again, I go back to sport. That's great for that, because if you are not pulling in the same direction, or if you are doing things which doesn't benefit the team and benefits you, the individual, instead of the team, you quickly get identified, and you're quickly no longer in that team. No matter how good you are, there are some non-negotiables. So no matter how good you are, if you are not in that team, pulling in that same direction, then guess what? You're not in that team very long.
Yeah, And you mentioned culture there, and I think that's something that's very interesting. Obviously, at Wakelet, it's a big team and ever growing, and culture is such a crucial part of its success. If you could summarize maybe just what you think makes a great culture or makes a great team.
I think culture is really simple. It's really simple when you've got it, and it's also simple to identify when you haven't got it. And I suppose the best way, the definition of culture, the way things are done here. So people would do something. You don't need the boss, you don't need Jam to come down and say, "Oh, that's not how we do things here at Wakelet."
Yeah.
Because people here already know that.
Yeah.
If someone says something which is disrespectful or out of turn, or leaves their cup on the table, or does something which is just not part of what's accepted, then somebody else will call them out on it. And I think when you get that, and you've got that peer-to-peer leadership going on, that's when it's special, and that's when the magic happens. I think how you generate that is quite difficult when an organisation has been established and you've got different generations within that organisation. But that's what I love about Wakelet. It's young, dynamic, and I've watched it grow from the very, very early days. And you'll be able to shape people come in. You understand when you're here, what does it mean? What does it take to be a Wakelet team member? Same for me in sport. When I joined Leicester Tigers, I knew very clearly when you walked in, you can feel it. What's expected, how you speak to people, how you respond to people, and that's not just up, that's also sideways and below as well. So do you clean up after yourself? Do you use your manners? Those things there, that sets culture, and cultures, that culture beats strategy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Culture beats strategy, yeah. And I think it's like, maybe accountability isn't the best word for it, but it's everyone understanding that they can play a part and that they can improve the culture from an individual perspective as well. And if it is, kind of cleaning up after yourself or offering a positive energy, I think that's something that I really believe in when it comes to culture, is if you can provide a positive energy and play a role in a team. And you mentioned that success is going to come through a team's approach rather than an individual approach. And I think that's what a large part of success is, and what a large part of a positive culture is everyone understanding that teamwork is the key. So yeah, and I think at Wakelet we're very lucky to have that kind of value system that everyone does play a part. There's no one bigger than the team. And it's interesting to kind of get insight into what a team is like. Obviously, you hear about teams that, professional sport, and you can only imagine what it's actually like to operate within those. But if you are approaching a high intensity game, for example, if you're playing for England, what importance does team have there, and what are the main value systems or main pillars of the team as you go into a game like that? It must be so tense and stressful, but
it is. But I think you touched upon a really good word before. You said accountability. That is one of the main pillars of a successful team, having great culture and great success. Because I know that if I was to, especially when you play at that level, you make mistakes, because if you're not making mistakes, then you're not pushing yourself. And to be the best at anything, you have to be pushing yourself out your comfort zone, and that naturally means you can be making mistakes. So being encouraged to fail often, make mistakes. Don't make the same mistake twice, because in sport that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
But you are allowed to push yourself and make mistakes. But then the key part about that is owning them. So if you play well, then you'll get all the plaudits and everything that goes with it. But equally, if you make a mistake, I don't need my teammates or my coach or somebody to tell me, oh, you messed up there, because I will own it. I'll stand up in front of the video and say, look, lads, this is what I was trying to do in this instance. It didn't work. If I had my time again, I may do the same thing again for these reasons, or now I've learned I might do something different. And I think when you do that, that leads on to trust. Yeah. So accountability builds trust. Yeah. I know that I don't need to worry about you doing your job in my team, which means I can focus on my own job, because I know that you're going to do your job to the best of your ability, because you know that if you don't do your job, it affects me. If I don't do my job, it affects somebody else. And understanding that I don't need to be dipping into everybody else. If I focus on my own, because I trust you to know that you're going to do your job. I think when you get enough people doing that, that's when the real magic happens. Yeah,
and I think in a scenario where someone does put their hands up and say, I made a mistake here, I made a mess of it, and acknowledges their failure and takes responsibility for their failure, I think as a teammate of that person, I would have just as much respect for them in that moment as I would if they were taking the claim for a big success that they've had. If someone has the courage to step up and say that, I'm like, I have so much respect for that. So I think that produces a good culture.
Absolutely. But I think when I struggled when I left elite sport, and I'm very fortunate because I get to work with, the likes of some of the Red Arrows. I work with the SAS, the SBS, the Special Forces, and I work with the Premier League, so I go into teams like Arsenal, Man City and Chelsea, and I see the best of the best at work. And when you step outside of that and go into a normal business, yes, those people that are taking all the plaudits for being salesperson of the year, very rarely the same person that stands up and owns their mistake. It's hard to find those. So when I walk into an environment and I can see people doing those things, the highs and the lows, and working closely, they're the cultures that I enjoy working with, and you can see they're sort of destined to be successful.
Yeah, and I think that's, obviously at elite sport and the Premier League and SAS, the environments where teamwork is critical, it is a large part of why a team would be successful. But as well, in terms of just general office environments and in schools and whatever team that you work on, I think accountability can play such a key part. And I think it does kind of form a team because you can rely on someone's authenticity. I think if someone is able to accept that they made a mistake, at least they know that they're acknowledging it and pushing on to try and improve and make progress. So I think that's something that's really transferable. Whatever line of work that you're in, that's a really valuable thing. So I think accountability is maybe underrated.
It certainly is one of the pillars that I have in how my own personal values. Accountability, resilience is key for me as well. To be able to life is tough. We've seen that over the past 18 months. Even without COVID, life is tough. It could always be tougher, but then it could always be easier as well. But I think being able to bounce back or reframe. I like to use the word reframe. So reframe challenging, difficult situations to find a positive. There'll always be a positive there, no matter how horrendous the situation is. I will always try and find something which puts a positive slant on it, which I can focus on that and not focus on the negative side. And I think if you've got enough people who share that same mindset of trying to find the positive, you have those energy zappers that can focus on the negative side, and that can bring a team down if everyone's thinking about that negative side, and it's there. We know it's there. We just don't need to give it too much weight. And if you get enough people pulling on the positive side, you can turn a not so good decision into a great decision just by people pulling in that same direction, just changing which lens that you look at the challenge through. Yeah, it's
that attitude that I think is really valuable. And you mentioned resilience, and I think I was listening to a podcast with Matthew Said, who I believe is a sports psychologist, and he says resilience over confidence. That's the more valuable skill set to have if you're resilient.
Humility, if you've got humility. So confidence without humility, it's sort of like arrogance, really.
Yeah.
But if you're humble, and I'm a big fan of Matthew Said as well. I've read all of his books.
Yeah.
And I listen to his podcast. I think he comes out with some great stuff. But yeah, you're right. I think that resilience and that being humble as well, that comes down to having the confidence to own your mistakes and be accountable. I think that only comes from being in I don't want to use the phrase psychological safety. It's more that sounds a bit too academic and too technical, but being comfortable knowing that you're allowed to do those things, you're allowed to make mistakes, you're allowed to talk about them, and that definitely comes from the top. If the boss is not that way, if they didn't lead with vulnerability or didn't share the mistakes that he or she makes, then how can they expect their team to also do the same thing? So I'm a big believer of doing that right at the very top, and it just spreads out all the way through the organisation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, but the value of failure and the value of loss, perhaps. What does that spark in your mind? That kind of concept of what does it offer to a team?
Oh, loss. I hate losing.
Yeah, I think most people do.
Yeah, they do. But also there's that phrase of, you get your greatest learnings from a loss. And as much as I don't like that phrase, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And I sit here now and being very fortunate to have played professional sport for 15 years. You mentioned before I played for Leicester and Gloucester in England and whatnot. And I've won 11 trophies in my career, which is amazing. I'm so proud of that. I'd love to have won 12.
Yeah.
But 11's better than 10. But equally, when I say I won 11, I've also lost in 5 finals. So if you add those together, 16 opportunities to be the best around at the time. But now, in hindsight, at the time when you lose in a final, it'd be that a European Cup final in front of 80,000 people, millions of people on TV, it is the worst feeling in the world at the time. But then looking back on it now, retrospectively, feeling that low and understanding what that feels like of those losses drives you to make sure you don't want to feel that again. So the fact that I've had those negative feelings make the positive feelings feel so much better. That's coming back to my sweet and sour analogy, which I always ram down people's throat, is to fully appreciate the sweet, you must first taste the sour.
Yeah.
Now, would I love to be sat here now saying to you, I've won 16 finals.
Yeah.
Yes, I would, but I don't think the finals that I have won would have felt and tasted as good without having known what it feels like to have lost. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I can imagine it provides a lot of wisdom. Especially, I'm guessing one of the losses was before one of the victories, so I can imagine going into the final, you have the experience of losing and the experience of what it takes to, to get it over the line. So I can imagine the experience and the perspective as well.
Absolutely, perspective and the lessons that you learn and what you did right, what you did wrong. As I say, in sport, well, in life anyway, you don't want to make the same mistakes twice. So we made some fundamental mistakes in preparation for some of those finals.
Mm-hmm.
And because most of the time when you get to a final, the game's not really won or lost on the day. Mm-hmm. It's won in the day, the build up to it, the preparation you put into it, the training, the mindset, all those things. Very rarely does something happen on the day which hasn't been planned or prepared for.
Yeah.
So we changed some of them, we made some mistakes, we put those right in the following years, and we won. Mm-hmm. There's a direct link to that.
Yeah, and I think because of that, people should not necessarily pursue failure, but take the risk and push themselves out of their comfort zone so they don't fear failure. I think from my experience at Wakelet, being here for a while, I have of course made plenty of mistakes and I've failed plenty of times, but that's how I've learned and that's how I've grown, I think. So it's kind of having the courage to push yourself out of the comfort zone, take the risks, and then if the failure happens, take accountability for it. And then, as I think you mentioned before, don't make the same mistake twice, sure, but the learning that you can gather from those experiences and those losses is so valuable. And I think our listeners can get a lot of value out of that as well, is kind of bearing in mind that, if you push yourself and if you look to grow and look to have different experiences, you can really tap into something really, really special and valuable. So
I'll be disappointed if I worked with you or with anybody that didn't make any mistakes.
Yeah.
Because for me, always, especially in the way I like to operate, is trying to push myself and push my team members. We want to be the best at whatever it is we do. And you only get to be the best by stepping outside your comfort zone, which not a lot of people want to get to. They're happy staying in their comfort zone.
Yeah.
If you're in your comfort zone, you're not making mistakes. So that means I don't want to be working in that environment, because I want to be excelling, like striving for excellence all the time. So it's striving for it, not for perfection, because that's unrealistic, but absolutely striving for excellence in everything that we do. Mm-hmm. So to do that, you have to try new things, especially in Wakelet, in the tech space. You've got to be trying new things. Innovation is key. So if you're not trying those things, then you're going to be left behind, in my opinion. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the value that I've had from Wakelet especially is that you grow with people. As Wakelet's grown, so as the team, even just as in terms of individual growth as well. So I think making mistakes as a team, I think, is often, even more profound than making a mistake as an individual, because you learn and grow together. And that's what makes a really strong team. So I guess a lot of teams perhaps grow in that sense, that they aren't immediately successful. Maybe the most successful teams had to go through quite a lot of loss and quite a lot of challenges in order to get to that level where they can maintain a mentality that does allow for them to really compete at the highest level.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I suppose on reflection, looking back, we lost our first Europe. It's the biggest game in the club's history. It was 96, so that shows how old I am. And we lost in the European Cup final to a team called Brive, and we were the favourites for that. And we had a really strong side going into that team. And then we didn't get back to that final. We didn't only lose, we lost heavily. We got stuffed. And then we didn't get back to that. And that feeling was horrendous, even now. Like when I catch up with all my old teammates, we don't talk about the trophies that we won. We never rarely talk about the successes. But we do talk when we have a drink and think about those times. We definitely talk about the games that we lost and the mistakes that we made and how we learned from them, how we turned those around. It took us 4 or 5 years to get into that situation again. Yeah. And when you've been through that pain of being in the changing room after you've lost, it's not nice. You don't want to go back there again, and you try that a little bit harder to make sure that you don't go there. Of
course, yeah. And I'm interested to know about what those conversations are like when you do meet up for a drink with your ex-teammates, and you do reflect on those experiences. Are you kind of harsh on yourselves? You think, oh, we made a mistake here, and here, we could have won that, etc. Or is it like, this is what I've learned from that experience, this is the value? Do you look back on those losses with fondness?
No, I'll be lying if I said look back with fondness, because I hate losing, and so do my teammates as well. Of
course.
And but what I would say is, you said harsh. It could be deemed harsh from the outside. We have a which I've since learned is like a no elephants rule, where when you're having a debrief, you say exactly what's on your mind. You don't wait until the the person's not in the room and say it behind their back. There's no space for that at higher performing elite teams because the game's so fast. You can't harbour something and then because it builds into something bigger and bigger and bigger. So if someone makes a mistake and they don't call it out themselves, somebody else will call it out.
Yeah.
And it's done, it's dealt with. It could be seen as brutal or harsh from the outside, or people who are not used to receiving feedback in that way. But feedback is a gift. Like feedback is given with love and should be received with love as well. Sometimes you don't like feedback the way it comes, but without that feedback, you cannot improve, you cannot get better. So absolutely, I don't know if I'd use the word harsh. Actually, I'd use the word brutal. Sometimes, even on myself. So if I've done something wrong, the feedback that I might get from it didn't have to be from my captain or my coach. It could be from one of my teammates. But I know when they're telling me something, they're not telling me to try and put me back in my box or make me feel smaller. They're telling me because what I didn't make the team perform better. So they want the team to perform better. So I take it on board. Sometimes it's not nice. You hear it, take it on the chin, move forward. And I think that's something that's really a really crucial ingredient as well in high-performing teams, is the ability to take feedback, constructive feedback, and then use that to your advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the kind of the value of communication.
Exactly, yeah. Communication, how is it delivered? How is it received? Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned constructive feedback. And I think, for all of us who operate on teams, whether it's a high-performing sports team, a team like Wakelet, or whatever the team is you work on, it's kind of being able to understand what the appropriate way to communicate the feedback is, because you all want what's best for everyone, and the progress of the team relies on the unity and the support system. I guess the support system element of a team, is that something that you value? Or
it is, and I think I've had to learn and adapt my own leadership style when I'm no longer in sport, because if you think about a sporting environment, we're playing on a pitch in front of thousands of people, millions of people on TV. If something didn't go my way, or if I get a bit of a telling off by somebody, one of my teammates, I can't harbour that for 10 minutes, because that's 10 minutes of the game gone.
Yes.
I've got to be able to park it, deal with it, park it straight away.
Yeah.
So that happens in a quick, fast-paced way. In the corporate world, in the commercial world, when you're not playing in front of millions of people, and you don't, that quickness is not necessarily there. The delivery is important. So I had to learn that when I stepped out of sport and went into the real world, and how I delivered feedback, because it's how I think some of the advice I gave as my parents gave me as a kid was treat people as you want to be treated yourself.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is true, because I like to get quick feedback. Don't give me any fluff. Give me exactly what it is that you need, or what I've done wrong, and I'll deal with it. Now, that's how I like to work. Yeah. You may not like that. So if I give you that same level of feedback and constructive criticism, that may not land well with you. So I'm more of a believer now, which I've learned since, is treat people how they want to be treated. So the feedback's still the same, but how do they want to receive it might be different to how I want to receive it. So it lands better.
That kind of leads us into the concept of leadership and understanding the personalities of those that are around you. There might be someone on the team that does like that kind of brutal feedback, like this is what you did wrong, this is what you need to do to improve, and it may not be presented with any fluff, and that might be exactly what they need to improve. Whereas there may be somebody else in the team that does need more of a conversation and maybe a bit more empathy. What kind of role, or what's your attitude to leadership generally?
Yeah, so again, I learned lessons from that from my sporting world. As I say, when I went into my first proper job, when I retired from sport, I learned that not everyone, like carrot and stick, I learned that it was very different, but it took me a little bit of time to realise that my leadership style was not 100% effective all of the time. Yep. But I kept looking at myself thinking, well, it's not me, it's not my style that's the issue here, because I've got a cabinet full of trophies at home that show me that that particular leadership style works. What I failed to understand was that in a different world, in a different environment, it takes a different type of leadership. So that particular type of leadership worked in that environment. So then that's when I went to university. I studied it. I'm a bit of a geek in that way. Yeah. I went to university and studied leadership. I did an undergraduate in business leadership and management, and understand around personality traits and psychometric profiling and those things. I think that's crucial. I wish I'd have had that knowledge when I was playing sport, but I didn't. But what I did learn is more. I think I'm more. If I was to call my leadership style, be transformational. So I like to empower people to be the. But I'm still. Feedback is always a fundamental part of leadership, and that's what I like to give and receive as well. But I also understand how people like to receive information, and whether that's done I suppose situational leadership is also important as well. Depending on the situation, it calls for a different type, a different style of leadership, different style of language, different style of communication. Before I'd studied that, and before I did my when I did my undergrad, I did my MBA afterwards as well. Before I did that study, I wouldn't have known that. I'd have carried on going down the same path as the rugby stuff. So when I get together with my old teammates, which we talked about just a minute ago, everyone in my team were high achievers. We're all striving to be the best. Now, when you stop playing sport, you don't all of a sudden stop being a high achiever. You just can't play sport anymore because your body's broken or you're too old.
You have to replace it with something else.
Yeah, so the guys in my team were still high achievers, but then they've gone on to take that same style, that how they saw leadership, how they'd received it from our captain, our coaches, and gone and delivered that out there in their world and their jobs going forward. So I find it fascinating listening to see how they're operating and what organisations they're working with and how their leadership style is developed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I'm also very interested in is leadership and how you can get the best out of people. And I think empowerment is such a crucial part. Empowerment and communication maybe are the front-running elements. But I can imagine the leadership style that you need when you're in a super intense sports game or whatever it is very different to the kind of leadership that's required in a corporate environment. And you have to kind of judge that in quite a short space of time. If you do want to walk into a corporate environment, you need to judge a room.
Yeah, there is that. There's boardroom. There's different. Again, it's situational. It depends. There's boardroom. But if I work with some CEOs, high performing CEOs, and they have the same mentality as the guys that I've worked with at Elite Sport. You know, that the same mentality as the guys at the Red Arrows in the military and down at the, you know, in the SAS. The same. You think of the way that how they think, they make decisions, sometimes quickly.
Yep.
But what they have the ability to do is, whether it's a right thing or right decision or the wrong decision, indecision is the worst thing. So they make a decision and you can turn a bad decision into a good decision by getting everyone on board and selling it and everyone sort of pulling their weight. So I think, again, that comes down to how that's delivered and that trust that you have in your team and that buy-in. I think that's really noticeable when you go into an organisation. You know, I'm very fortunate to work with some high-performing CEOs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the comparison between sports teams and more corporate or professional, well, professional not being the right word, but let's say a corporate team is really fascinating. I have a couple of quotes here that kind of encapsulates that comparison. One from Michael Jordan, who I'm a big fan of, says, "Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships." The second quote being from Steve Jobs, "Great things in business are never done by one person, they're done by a team of people." So pretty much the same value of teamwork. I guess it kind of, it does identify the difference between such different situations, being at elite sports and being at elite corporates. What do those quotes provoke in your mind?
Yeah, I think they're brilliant. I sort of fully support and endorse that both of those two individuals are high performing elite individuals. But I absolutely agree with it. I think with my own mentality is I would rather do something in a team than by myself. Yeah. So I'd rather win something collectively and share that moment with somebody else than doing it. But I can't imagine being, even if I was a golfer or a tennis player or someone who did something in a single sport, they've still got a team around them, still got a coach, a nutritionist. And that the beauty of winning things and succeeding is sharing those moments with people. And I think you see, I'm a massive fan of that. And I think any opportunity I can get to be a part of a winning team, that's what I miss from sport the most, is being part of that team. I don't need to be at the front of that team. I don't need to be leading the team. I just want to be a part of that team. And sometimes understanding that, today I might need to be at the front, tomorrow I might need to be at the back. Next week I might need to submit it somewhere else. Yeah. So understanding that you can just have different seats in that team, on that bus, if you like. Yeah. I think if everybody else understands that as well, that's very powerful. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think something for me that plays a key role in team is the wolf pack kind of mentality. I don't know if this is actually true, but I believe that the formation of a wolf pack is often that the young, energetic wolves are at the front, kind of leading the way. Let's say the elderly or vulnerable wolves are in the middle, and it's often the alpha male or alpha female wolf that's at the back overlooking it. And I think that kind of taps into what you said there about how it's not really looking for the limelight or the spotlight. It's kind of just having everyone's backs.
Yeah, I think if you think about how it works with in cycling, you have the peloton. You've got the strong one at the front and everyone tucks in behind, and when they're tired they drop off and somebody else takes over.
Yes.
We've just seen that in the Olympics. But equally, if you look at the geese formation, one of our at Switch to Play, I was fortunate to be the CEO of Switch to Play. for a number of years. When we did our team code, we chose geese as an infographic that sort of was important value to us. And that was because at some point, me as a CEO, I was at the front of that V formation as they're flying through the sky. But then if I'm tired or I don't have the skill set or the expertise to be at the front of that, I would drop off, and if somebody else would know to step in. Not like we don't take it in turns, it's just somebody else's turn just to step in when they know that their skill set, they can add more value.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of resonates with that wolf pack. The strength is in the collective,
Yes.
not in the individual. And if someone flies, like if you think of the cycling or all that geese formation, if someone's just out of line, then they get left behind because that's how it didn't align properly, and there's the most efficient way of working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the same at Wakelet as well, because with Wakelet, it can be an intense environment that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be high performing. And if someone is having an off day or someone's tired because they've just kind of gone through a phase of being really kind of pushing a project or pushing a campaign or whatever it is, I think it's almost natural and instinctive that somebody else kind of steps into that place and kind of takes that role. It's not a vocal thing. We don't kind of have that communication. It just kind of happens naturally, which I think is a sign of a
if you're doing
great
that,
team.
if you're doing that already, that's really powerful. The thing I would say on that is it's really good to acknowledge when that's been done, because that's when people don't get taken for granted. So like, let's say I'm having a tough day, and I need some support because I've had to work really hard the last 48 hours, and you step in and you recognise that in me, and you step in and pick up some of my workload. It's important that I acknowledge that I've seen you've done that, so I don't take it for granted. That then it's important then, because I want you to know that whenever you need some support, I'm there for you as well. I think that's reciprocal. I think that's really important.
Okay, that's interesting. I think, because you can get preoccupied with how natural it happens, you perhaps kind of don't acknowledge it and you don't verbalize it. Or...
I think that's really, really important, because I'd use an example of so in the Heineken Cup in 2001, Leicester played Stade Francais. We played Stade Francais away, and I was very fortunate to have scored a couple of tries. I scored the winning try in injury time in the corner. Now, visibly to the team, probably not to the team, but to the supporters and everyone who's watching, they'll see me go down and score that try in the corner and say, "Well, what an amazing try and what an amazing result." But the reality is, one of my teammates did something 5 minutes earlier that enabled that passage of play to happen. So whilst everyone's congratulating me for scoring that try, which is great, I had the understanding and the self-awareness to know that was a small part of it. I went across and congratulated my teammate who did something 5 minutes before that won us the ball, that turned it over, that enabled somebody else to do something, somebody else to do something, somebody else to do something. So I may have been seventh in that chain to score. So people who on the outside, that'd be the same here at Wakelet, people on the outside may see something and credit a individual for that. But the reality is, if that one person takes all the credit and goes, like for me, if I'd have gone, "Great, yeah, look at me, I'm amazing, I scored that winning try and it is all on me," that wouldn't land well in my team. The fact that I understood that and I went across immediately to the guys who helped that passage of play, I think that's really powerful, because they know their job has been, they've executed their job correctly and it wasn't taken for granted. They know, even though their name may not be in the newspaper or anything else, they know that they played a pivotal role in ensuring that we as a team won. And I think that's crucial. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I can get so much value out of these stories. And I think they are very transferable to any team, Obviously, that's the pinnacle of sport, but whatever team the listeners operate within, I think can transfer that value system and transfer that experience and kind of gather the value from that insight and apply it into their work as well. So I think so many of the stories that you've shared today have been really, really powerful. So thanks so much for jumping on and talking to us about your experiences and your attitude towards team leadership, mentality and challenges. We mentioned at the start that you are, of course, the co-founder and director of Centrum Solutions. Be really interested to hear more about that. If you want to give a quick overview of what service you provide.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so Centrum, again, it's right in my sweet spot. So I work in transition and I help members, elite athletes and members of elite military, like I mentioned before, transition into what the next phase of their life is, what their next career is. Now that's done through, because I know how their mindsets are. I know they want to find a new career pathway which enables them to maximise their teamwork, their leadership, their transferable skills. It's an area that I'm really passionate about. And the guys that when they transition out of those roles, those structured lives, need some support. So I've been able to find an area to utilise my passions in that area to help other people find their next career and their next passions as well.
Amazing. Yeah, sounds really inspiring. We will share a Wakelet collection with all the resources that we discussed today, but of course we'll include links to Centrum Solutions as well. So if listeners are interested in learning more about it, check the Wakelet collection that we've attached. Just to wrap it up, thank you so much, Leon, for jumping on. Really enjoyed the conversation today. And thank you to all the listeners that have tuned in, whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it on Spotify or whatever podcast service that you're using. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you have any ideas or if you have any thoughts based on the conversation that we had today, feel free to share them with us on social media. We'd love to hear your feedback. Include the hashtag the Wakelet podcast or include the hashtag Wakelet Wave. We'd really like to see what your reaction has been. Thank you very much, Leon. Thank you very much, listeners. Really enjoyed today. And we'll catch you next time. Thank you very much.